Hello, hello, and welcome to the Dear Nikki podcast, where I do my best to answer your questions, struggles, comments, whatever it might be about the wonderful world of, it's very hard to say, wonderful world of user research. Except today, I am so super excited to introduce a guest speaker on the podcast. Today, we have Hannah Knowles joining us. Hi, Hannah.
Hi, how are you?
I am good. I'm so excited for you to be here and for us to chat about our beloved topic.
Me too. I'll just give everyone an intro because I'm sure not all of your listeners know who I am, but my name's Hannah. I've been a researcher for over 11 years and no, not a day over 20, as if I wish. But I first joined research when it was an amazing time. I think I was really lucky when I joined the industry actually, because 11 years ago it was like really fresh, especially in the UK. I came into a government department, which I loved. It was about healthcare, and I felt like UX research really fit with what we were doing, and it felt great that I could help people. And it just really sparked this love for me of, yeah, wanting to help a little bit more and finding ways to do that. I'm never going to be a doctor, but what I can do is do great services that can at least help somebody get a doctor's appointment, which is kind of what sparked my love for research initially. And then I know we're going to talk a little bit about, yeah, what Nikki's just said, off shared love of workshops, because it's what we're both excited about. But I think when I worked in healthcare, the thing that I really noticed was nobody gets in a room together to talk about things. And that seemed to be like a moment for people of like, oh, this person in this department. And you're like, yeah, you've never spoke before. And they're like, no, no, I've worked here for 15 years. And you're like, oh, this is awkward. We need to change this classic business setup. And it just kind of, yeah, for me, it was like, how can I help businesses make better decisions with research? And my goal always as a researcher has been, how do I get my research used? Because if it's not being used, then I am pointless. And here we are.
Amazing, amazing. I love that. And yeah, similarly, joining about 10, 11 years ago. Yeah, different vibes.
It
Different
was
vibes.
very different. I
Yeah.
think, especially like 11 years ago, it was going, I think it had gone through this transition of being maybe a little bit more, especially with development teams where they traditionally were just set up and didn't have researchers on them. UCD kind of really came in, especially to government departments and the UK industry then. And I think when I first joined it, because it was so new, we were definitely more experimental, and
Yeah.
that's something that I feel like has got a little bit lost along the way. I felt like I could come in and just suggest something and it would be exciting because it was new. And now it's like, we don't want to do that. And I'm like, why? And they're like, I've tried it before and it didn't work. I'm like, yeah,
Yeah.
but not with me. Like,
Yeah.
I'm gonna make it work. But I think when I first started, it was definitely different. The industry's like really hard at the minute, and we all understand that it's hard. But what I want to be able to do is bring a bit more fun and excitement back to product teams, because that's why I loved research. It was fun and exciting, and it had this pace, and we were able to find things out, and we're able to make our own decisions and feel in control. And that feels like now it's definitely not the same, but I want to be able to find ways to bring that back in.
Yeah, I love that. And I love what you said about first the fun and excitement, the experimentation, that vibe. It's just so nice. And then also what you said about helping businesses and teams make better decisions because we are pointless if our research doesn't get used. It's like, it's like writing a book that you don't publish and it just sits in a drawer and you're like, "Cool, I wrote the book, but nobody's going to benefit from it. Nobody's going to read it because it's sitting in your drawer." And it's just our research is sitting in a virtual drawer.
Absolutely. I think one of the things or I get asked a lot is how to get your research used, or I did this great piece and nobody's ever looked at it. And I'm like, because it was the wrong research to do in the first place. And that's
Yes.
why it hasn't been used. And I think the biggest thing that I learned, especially joining different, or I've been in lots of product teams, is figuring out what type of researcher they need me to be.
Yeah.
And I think that comes with a lot of time and experience.
Mm.
But one of the things that I've definitely noticed is teams need a lot more help in that decision making process. We as researchers tend to think our job stops at the analysis, and
Yeah.
then we're like, bye bye, into the world, do what you want. And actually, that doesn't happen because we have to be the catalysts to bridge the gap between what people want and what that actually means in a product world and landscape. And nobody ever wants to take that job on. Like the product teams, no, hun, that isn't me. And we're like, no, 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 our job stopped because I've done this great piece of research. So bye, you
Yeah.
do with it what you want. And the designers are like, oh no, we just write requirements and want to do our thing. And I think actually there is a gap in product teams for that. And I think because of the transition that research is going through, we are perfect to fill that void and actually make our way back to the table through that of we're not just here to help users, we've always been here to help the business, just we haven't had the capability or capacity to do that, but now we can, so
Yeah.
let's do it.
Yeah. That's amazing. I love that. And I'm a huge, yeah, huge believer in like, we can't just leave analysis behind and like, we can't just throw it over the fence and hope for the best because, no one person is equipped to make a decision. And that's why the teams need to come together to make that decision together. And you are part of that team. And as you said, like, this is how you facilitate your research being used and being like considered and acted on. We talk about actionable insights, but no writing is actionable unless somebody helps push it forward.
Absolutely. I think one of the things I used to do a lot when I was a researcher or in my younger days was like write a recommendation at the end of the report and then be really annoyed that nobody took the recommend like and I mean really annoyed that nobody took the recommendation seriously. And then I was like, actually, it's not my place as a researcher to solely come up with what that recommendation looks like. My role is to bring that research and facilitate a space where everybody can come look at that data like agnostically with a different set of viewpoints from these different stakeholders to come up with a decision that works well for all of us, because
Yeah.
the recommendations, or if I come up with those recommendations, are a biased because they're
Yeah.
from my mind,
Yeah.
for starters. Even though we've got evidence, I am not the user, so I can't make that decision. But also, what I don't understand if I come up with these recommendations alone is actually what's a priority to the business? What constraints do I have? What sort of tech stack do I have to even be able to implement some of these things? And that for me, until you get everybody in the room to do that, that's why your research isn't being used, because all we then do is pump out reports that are kind of pointless to people, and we're getting to this rhythm and cycle that we don't want to be in, which is just generating research for a tick box exercise. But if
Yeah.
we do that research, take a little bit of breathing space in the form of workshops and figure out, okay, how can we make a decision and what do we want to do moving forward? Then we start to get into this better rhythm of not just let's work in 2 week agile sprints because someone told me it looks good and I want to see research every 2 weeks, but actually start to think about what is a sprint looks like for us and how does that work for research and the product team. And I think that way of working together and having these moments of connectivity through workshops is what really helps drive a team.
Yeah.
And that's an important one for me.
Yeah. Amazing. Yeah. I love that. And I think it is hard. I remember I struggled so much with writing recommendations because I sat there being like, I don't know. You're just kind of like, I don't know. And a lot of people struggle with that. They're like, should I write them? What should I write? I literally just don't know. And yeah, it's a team sport, like because only the devs know the true feasibility. They really know the tech. Only the product managers, well, I mean, it's shared knowledge, but the product managers specialize in the business. The designers just specialize in the design and the experience. And there's all of these fundamental roles to make this one decision, and it shouldn't be on any one person. It also shouldn't just be on your stakeholders. It's a team sport. And I love that you brought up the whole agile thing because I like it's like sometimes a square peg round hole situation where we're trying to fit things in. But I'm curious now if we can kind of talk a little bit about workshop methods and approaches and maybe how you think about that in an agile environment. And we can talk about outside as well of agile.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I've worked in agile teams, big, small. I'm talking, I mean, I think one team I joined was maybe 35 specialists, and that
Yeah.
was hard to get everybody's time. And
Yeah.
one of the things I noticed was actually we'll all come to these things called ceremonies. So in I don't know why they're called ceremonies, but I always think I want a medal at the end of it. And sometimes I think we should all deserve medals for sitting through that session, but we have these things called ceremonies. And one of the things that I noticed is actually everybody's already coming into the room at that point and moment in time. So, how can I take methods that are traditionally longer, shorten them down so I can get what I need and have everybody in the room without them thinking I'm pulling them away from what they need to do? A really good example that I always use is teams every 2 weeks, or you might do it monthly, depending on how your team like to work. Run something called a retrospective. So we look at what's gone well, what hasn't gone well, and actually what do we want to do moving forward. So I was like, oh, I love this thing called assumption mapping. And that helps us figure out what our next thing should be that we want to work on. So it's like, how can I shorten that and fit it in? So what I did was, if you don't know me, I'm like obsessed with 2x2 grids for some reason. Like I literally think a 2x2 grid will solve your life problems. I'm like,
Yeah.
kids, let's get a grid on the wall. Let's fix it. And they're like, please put the grid away, mummy. No one needs that. But a really simple one that you can use is something called problem clarity versus risk. It's a simple 2x2 grid. You have problem clarity mapped from high to low. So, how much do we know about this problem? And actually, if we were to do nothing with it, how risky is that? So, I would take everything that we would find in our retrospectives and I would get them to write them as assumptions. And within 10 minutes, we would basically have what our next research plan is. Also, if you don't know me, I am very lazy as a researcher. And as Nikki's just said, it's a team sport, so why not get the team to do your work for you in the nicest way? So I think finding ways or finding moments where your team naturally come together and thinking about how can I best use this time with them and for them is definitely not just a benefit to you, but also those guys. The other thing I definitely noticed with a lot of agile things is then just meetings. They tend not to come along with activities. Some do, like retrospectives, things like stands. They have a very particular format. But actually, if we deviate from that, we end up just rambling for a very long period of time. No decisions get made. And the thing that really sticks in my mind is having an activity brings focus to people and they have to do it. And it has this like kind of leveling of the playing field in the nicest way because the quietest voices can join in and the loudest voices are basically put on mute. And it
Yeah.
helps everybody bring a voice into that, which is why workshop methods for me work great in these agile settings. But one
Yeah.
of the downsides of workshops, which is, I guess, from the traditional background that I'm used to, workshops are like half a day, or that's what everybody
Yes.
thinks. You hear the word workshop and they're like, oh,
8 hours.
no.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not doing that. I'm not coming along for hours. And I'm like, they don't have to be.
Yeah.
It's just finding ways we can shorten the things we love to do and actually fit them into these agile ceremonies because the more people get used to it too, the more value they see from these little things we're doing, we can then build up to that 3 hour workshop where we're like, actually, no, we do need that time. And I think that's the biggest thing for me of I always hear pushback of, oh, we just can't afford that. Nobody can get in the room. And you're like, well, we can because we already do that.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just going to repurpose your time.
Interesting. Oh my God, I love that. It's like a minimum viable workshop.
Literally, literally. And I just spread it out. So I'm like, okay, you won't give us 3 hours. I'll just spread that 3 hours out across the 2 weeks then. And I will figure out the time where we're going to be together. And I will take each of those activities or elements that I want to do and basically match it to another meeting already in their diary. And I'll either add it at the beginning and say, I'm just going to run a little icebreaker and get this session set up. Or actually, is a really good wrap up. Let's do this activity. So I'm still getting what I need, and they feel like they're getting what they need from whatever session they're in. So it's just thinking about how you can do it differently and not fitting into this world or idealism that we're kind of taught of everything needs to be done in these blocks. Or it's a bit like the myth of usability testing's always an hour long. I don't know why
Yeah.
we're always blocking an hour out when I'm like, oh, that takes somebody 10 minutes to do. So
Yeah.
just block 10 minutes out with someone. But it's kind of trying to get over that myth of workshops need to be long. They really don't. They don't.
I think that that's amazing because I think that we can get really stuck within these like frameworks and rules. Like I'm honestly the same where I'm like workshop, yeah, okay, so we can either do one huge 8-hour block or we can split it up into two 4-hour days or we could maybe do like 3 2-hour day. Like I'm always aiming regardless for like 4 to 8 hours, but not 48, 4 to 8. Imagine.
They would not love 48 hours.
I literally think I would be like, I don't know, captured and put into some room forever.
They
Um,
would also maybe feel like they'd been captured and tortured by workshop methods. Like they'd be like, no, we're not doing this. No,
I
no.
love that. But yeah, it's breaking those mental models. And I love what you said about taking those 3 hours and breaking it up over the 2 weeks in a way that's manageable, but also like people get I don't wanna say it like social media almost, but they get those small dopamine hits.
Absolutely.
I love
Well,
that.
yeah, and we'll live for that now. Like, I
Yeah,
think it's understanding how teams and people have changed and
yeah,
thinking about how can we work with that, because especially now, like we do work quite remote. I mean, I've
yeah,
worked remote maybe for like 6 7 years now, but the thing that I've really missed is those little moments where like I'm going to make a coffee with someone and we'll have this really great conversation, and actually what we didn't need was then another like 3 hour meeting later on. What I find
yes,
now is we tend to have more meetings, but what we make less of is decisions. And I truly believe that's because we're missing out of some of these just organic moments that just naturally happen when we're with people. So for me, it's thinking about how can I basically create those organic moments with other things that we already have. And that's why introducing the workshop methods work really well for those, because it also again just injects a bit of fun into a
yeah,
meeting. Like we can be a little bit silly when we're doing a method, and it can bring just new energy into a meeting. They're great if you're stuck in longer meetings, and if you need that interjection, just like move it further up and we'll do a 10-minute thing just to like let everybody cool off, especially maybe if your meetings got slightly heated. They're really good to just break that energy up and think about, okay, how can we shift this to make people feel more positive about what we're doing? And also, if we break up that workshop method, it makes it easier for us, because I sometimes come out of those 3 hour workshops and I'm like, oh, you're a lot.
yeah,
You're a lot of me to do, and I don't have that time either anymore as a researcher. So I try to think about how can I break it up to make it easier for all parties, because I think long term, I definitely see us working in shorter bursts. And I am an advocate of that as a researcher anyway, of we'll do shorter research sessions, we'll bring less insights to the table, but we're bringing them more frequently. And actually, and you're totally right, it helps with that little dopamine hit of like keeping the product team happy because they're like, woo, lots of research. But actually, what you're doing is just breaking it down into really bite-sized chunks, which is tends to be how they work and think. So it's about how can I match that, because what I'm doing as a researcher, they hear research and they think, oh, time. Oh, there goes all my time.
yeah,
And that's the last thing I want somebody to think, is that it's a time sink, because we're
yeah.
not. We're not, I promise.
No, no, we're
Sometimes we
not,
are. Sometimes.
but everybody is sometimes.
Exactly. It's human to be that.
Yeah. No, I love that. And I'm wondering, are there any other like methods that you've used that you've been able to take maybe from long form to more bite size? Because I love that assumption mapping the problem clarity versus risk is like unreal, like so good. Are there any other methods that you can
Yeah.
think of?
So I use empathy mapping a lot in sessions, but I time box everything. Another thing people don't know about me is I time box my life, otherwise nothing would get done. But I use empathy maps, especially when we're thinking about, I'll go into a session and we'll start talking about making decisions. So I'm like, okay, let's quickly map out what that person looks like. So instead of us spending a lot of time, I time it to 1 minute. So and I'm very lightning pace on each of the things. So everybody gets 1 minute, you write it down, we'll have 1 minute to do the analysis. And very tight on time too. And I think that's one of the things you really have to learn. If you're going to introduce this into it, you do have to be strict with what you do. Journey mapping's a really good one that can be broken down into smaller chunks. So I tend to do this again with product teams, usually on a morning. So after the stand, we might talk about what we're working on, and I'll say, okay, well, let's quickly map out that little bit of the journey that we're looking at. Or actually, I'm stuck with this, and can we do it together? And take that 5 to 10 minutes to just map out small sections. And then at the end of like 2 weeks, ta-da, they probably have a full-blown journey that they didn't even know existed. And I think it's finding ways to just help them nudge along a little bit and help give them a tiny bit of value. But anything with the word mapping in can definitely be broken down, because I read them, and actually what you can do is there's even sections of swim lanes. So
Yeah.
one day you might say, let's just write down all the high level steps. And then the next day you might take one of those high level steps and break that down a little. And actually they don't really know what they're doing until they get to see this lovely finished piece of work that you've helped them do. But actually it's so valuable for them, because sometimes they haven't even spoke about that part of the journey for months, years, maybe haven't even thought about it at all. So anything with mapping in can usually be broken down into really nice steps. There's some great websites out there for workshop methods that you can we can definitely share. We'll share them at
Yeah.
some point. But I tend to go off, I'll look at a method. The next thing that I tend to do is, you will never see me without this lovely version of these books, but I'll take it and I'm very analog, but I'll write down what the steps are, and I'll do what every researcher does. And I think, how can I make the most simple version of this? And
Yeah.
then I'll break it up into little chunks, and I will try and add a time to it. And then I go to my diary and I think, okay, where would this fit in a meeting? If it doesn't fit, not everything fits into a meeting that already exists. I think, okay, maybe that isn't an essential thing that we need now. But if I do need people, then I can think, okay, I'm only asking them for 30 minutes. That's totally reasonable to ask somebody for 30 minutes to go through this piece of work. Something I also love to do with research or product teams in general is take card sorts. So traditionally we use card sorts with people. Oh man, do it with your team, game changer. Like, I love getting them to prioritize on cards of what they want me to look at, or if we've got a particular feature that we're looking at, I can break that down and give it to them. The same with journey maps. Like, there's so many great things you can do with card sorts that I'm like, the team can spend as long as they want on them. You can do it and send them links. They don't even have to do it in a time of a meeting, or they can do when
Yeah.
they're boarding another meeting. It's usually
Yeah.
when it happens. But having these kind of methods that we would traditionally run outside of our product team and bring those back in, I'm like, why don't we do more of that? Like, that's where there's value, not gathering data. It's doing the stakeholder interviews, doing the things that we used to do that I see much less of, because there's more pressure to deliver insight. And actually, yeah, you can deliver insight, but I'm going to give you more impact if we deliver decisions. And
Yeah.
that's the change for me. That's I've definitely seen happen.
Oh, I love all of that. There's so much good stuff in there. And like, especially love what you said, like, because, like, yeah, stakeholder interviews. Let's take the methods that we use on our users and put them on to our stakeholders. And like, I was just thinking, I was like, if I can sit and do an interview with a user for an hour for a journey mapping interview, why can't I sit down with my team and do something like that? But like, you can break it up then into, like, I don't know, two 30-minute sessions, four 15-minute sessions. Like, it's totally doable.
Absolutely. Like, whatever time my stakeholders have, because I do things a bit of an excuse to say, I've got no time in my diary. I'm
Yeah.
sure we all or blocked in my diary, but I'm like, but you definitely do. Like, I'm like, I'll get up at 6 a.m. and walk and talk with you if that's what we have to do. Like, whatever we need to do to make it happen, I will always make sure that we do that. And I think breaking them up into these manageable chunks, like we've said, is just easier for them to digest too. Like, a lot of our stakeholders or a lot of teams and industries don't know what research is. So then when we come into it and we think, oh, we're going to do all this great user research, of course they love that. Like, that's exciting to them. They just want to dive in at the deep end. And they're like, just go and find out everything. You're like, whoa, I can't. I'm only
Yeah,
one
yeah.
human. So it's helping figure them out. Like, what is a priority to them? What's the next decision they need to make? What research do they need to do that? I always say to people, I want to own a yacht and be a millionaire in a size 6. But like realistically, I just need to be healthy and pay the bills. They're very different things that I would need to do to get that. And I think it's getting a team to figure out, okay, would love that, but I don't have the time. We don't have the money. But what my job is to do, which seems to be the job nobody wants to take on, is to help them figure out what that looks like. And I think that's a little bit of a skill that's especially for me being lost in research. And I think that's just as the markets moved and as the industries moved and progressed, especially now where job roles are very much overlapping with other jobs that are coming into the market. There's definitely a lot of overlap going on, but
Yeah.
where I can see us kind of carving this new space is not just being research advocates, but being decision advocates and
Yeah.
bringing our skills to the party in a different way. And that's how we earn our seat at the table, not through good research, because really anybody can do that. I know researchers will hate me for saying that because I'm one too, but we have to be realistic. There are
Yeah.
tools that help people do this. What there aren't tools to help people do is make a good decision. And
Yeah.
that's where we come in, is that people and with that skill.
I love that. Oh, I just like, yeah, we are, and we're that support system that helps facilitate those decisions. Yeah. And like, I especially love this whole concept of it's almost like, and I used to see this, I don't see it anymore. We're thought partners. Like we
Yes.
work with the teams, we help them, like, because user research, generally speaking, like as researchers, we are facilitators. We are kind of solvers. And as we were talking earlier, we're thinkers. And so we like to pull things apart usually, but we don't do that as much anymore. We're not as much like thought partners. It's almost like we're all sitting in these small little bubbles, siloed out, being like, okay, here are your insights by, I gotta go do this next thing. Oh, here are your insights by, gotta go do this next thing. And like, I listened to you tell me that you need this research. Here's this research. And now you're like, well, what the fuck is this research? And like your stakeholders, like, I don't need this. Actually, this isn't actually what I wanted. And it's because I didn't think about, and it's like, blah. Yeah. Yeah.
Totally. And then you get into this like cycle where they're like, well, research were wrong and they did nothing and I'm not paying for it. And you're like, yeah, but I mean, if we're being honest, lads, you didn't tell me what you wanted in the first place. But
Yeah.
that's where we need to come back in. And I think businesses or organizations and product teams always have that classic, oh, we know what we want. And then you're like, okay, well, let's sit in a room together and tell me what you want. And by the end of that session, I can guarantee it will be totally different. Like what they've written down for you on a brief is not actually the thing they want at all. And I hear this a lot of product teams, especially, they'll come to us and say, we need more research or need more, the classic phrase, we need more testing. I
Yeah.
hate if another product team tells me they need usability testing, I will cry. Because I'm like, you don't need usability testing. You actually, I see organizations now, especially in the world we live in, they have a plethora of data. Like we have social media, we have tools that didn't exist even 10 year ago to the magnitude that they do today. And it's like we can do research so much more smartly, but where our role is definitely going to change is going back for me to this kind of facilitator role. And I think that's a beautiful way to talk about it, is we were always facilitators. We've just got lost along the way of being team facilitators. And that's kind of maybe where our values dropped off a little bit. And we need to figure out, how do we bring that back? Because that's, for me, that was the exciting thing for
Yeah.
me. Like, that's kind of why I joined research. Like, I was this massive nerd when I was in uni, and I used to read papers all the time on research methods, which is so sad. But at the time, I didn't even know that I was reading about research methods. What
Yeah.
I thought it was this great new innovative way of thinking. And actually, it wasn't. It was just a process. And I'm obsessed with that. But it's
Mhm.
actually having that and bringing it to teams, and bringing it to teams now is still as new as it was 10, 15 years ago, because actually that cycle changes. But it's, how can we take those principles and update them to fit product teams? And I think that's kind of why product and research butt heads quite a bit, is because actually we're still sat on a pedestal somewhere. And I think research can sometimes be obnoxious.
Yeah.
And we think, actually, we're not going to change. And you're like, no, 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 like, what? It's not an option. Like, we'll have to, because
Yeah.
everyone else has. And I think we're just in that evolution point, and it's finding out how we evolve into that. And I think it is exciting. It's scary. It's hard. It's brutal. It's tiring. I do see we're coming out as phoenixes at the other end. It's some
Yeah.
point, but I just don't know what that's going to look like. But I hope that it's going back to more of this facilitator role, because I think that's where we can really add value to teams.
And like history does repeat itself. Like even within the cycle of the 10, 11 years, I've seen things go in and out of, it's trends, right? I mean, like some of the clothing that I see now in clothing stores, I'm like, wow, wow, we're
Oh,
back
tell me
here.
about it. And you're like, oh, guys, I thought we left the early 2000s to die, and we all agreed never to see that fashion again. No, we didn't.
Yeah, 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 and there it is. There it is right there, and everybody's wearing it.
And
So,
everyone's like, please stop. You will regret this. I did. I was your age once.
yeah, yeah. Let me tell you. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I'm like, oh God, I've turned into the old woman in the shop. It's
I know, I know. Sad but true, sad but true. But yeah, so I think we're actually almost out of time, which is so sad because I could just like chat forever. I'm wondering for like the last question, if I'm somebody who has like never really facilitated a workshop or wants to get into facilitating more workshops, where should I start?
me. I think for me, where I first started was with that assumption mapping workshop. It's one of the easiest workshops to run, and will give you really great value at the end of it. So, assumption mapping is essentially starts with a blank canvas, and you get the team to write everything down. It holds on to those, some of those things that we're already used to, like affinity sortings and groupings, and it leans into those skills that you're probably more comfortable with. The challenge that comes with something like facilitating a workshop is time management. Getting people to shut the fuck up. Like, it's always,
Huh?
if you could just not talk.
Yeah.
But I always do that by time boxing people. So I'll always say, it's great that you want to talk, but you're only going to get a minute to talk about that point, because we want to move it quickly. So I think learning how to move people quickly through a conversation is definitely a skill. But in the early days, I would have a clock on the screen and it would literally count down to someone, because when they see they've got 10 seconds left, you can guarantee they're going to panic and wrap it up.
Yeah.
But that's what you want to do. I think the other thing is learning how to do workshops in person and digitally. In person workshops are definitely easier. Like, you get a little bit more kind of engagement from people. But actually, what I learned over through the years was how to bring some of that engagement in digitally. So you can ask people, like, not everyone's comfortable with camera on, but that for me really changes the room and dynamic a lot, because if somebody rolls their eyes at someone else, that's totally fine. But I want to be able to see that as the facilitator, so I can see where some of these dynamics maybe lie, or actually where we're going to have trickier kind of moments of conversation. But if I was going to start today, I would go off, I would plan a 15-minute assumption mapping with the team. I would introduce it on a Friday. I love running workshops on a Friday, because Fridays, let's be real, nobody's going to work on a Friday. Nobody wants to work on a Friday. workshops are fun and contained. And actually, everyone's diary is free on a Friday afternoon. Just saying, everybody, if you go check past 2 p.m., nobody's got a meeting in. But to end the week on something really fun with the product team that's of value to them actually just rounds the week up really nicely. So I think starting with something simple that leans into things you already know and are comfortable with is definitely where I should have started. Maybe I didn't always start there and I went in at the deep end. But now I'm comfortable running workshops to like 5 to 800 people.
Yeah.
And that's just because I've learned how to do that. But I think the biggest skill is definitely time management.
Yeah.
Like you've got
Yeah.
to be hot on time.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's going to fail.
Yep, I completely agree. I think getting people to stop talking or at least spreading the ability for other people to talk so you don't only have that one person.
Absolutely. In person, that's easier to
Yeah.
manage. I don't know, but I like sit with a fidget toy all the time. But like, I like pass something around a room physically. And
Yeah.
it's a bit like the talking stick. If you don't have the talking stick, I don't want to hear your voice.
Yeah.
And actually, what that forces someone to do is actually actively listen to each other. Whereas in meetings, we just seem to be fighting for a voice. In workshops, we create that breathing space to actually listen to each other. And I just find that moment so beautiful.
Yeah.
Bring those beautiful moments back to your product team.
Oh, well, that's like the most perfect place to stop. I
Look
love
at that.
that.
Like we do this.
I love that. Oh my gosh. Okay, perfect. Well, yeah, thank you so much, Hannah. That was amazing. I think that there was so much that regardless of skill level, like newbies could take out, more experienced people can take out of this to try and apply to their day to day. So that's all we can ever ask for. So thank you so much. I really appreciate
My
it.
pleasure. My pleasure. And thank
Amazing.
you for inviting me along.
Yeah, perfect. All right, everybody. Well, thank you so much for listening in, and I will talk to you soon.